Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great. Well, the fall proceeds along. You know, we haven't really had a shutdown.
No.
Although today we're going to talk about some of the last minute, kind of the final things, you know, when everything kind of shuts down for the season. But it hasn't really done that yet. But I like having enough time in the fall to get things done.
Yeah.
How about you? How's everything going in your yard?
It's good. You know, I think I'm going to give up on some of those little green tomatoes that have not yet turned, and I think
Yes.
that's okay.
I think that's okay.
There's still had some sun sugars who were still producing while I was gone last weekend, and so I think I'll pick those. I'm sure the skins will be a little tough, but we'll see. We'll see.
Speaking of green tomatoes, have you ever had mock apple pie? My mom, with the last green tomatoes, had gotten a recipe from someone for mock apple pie that was made out of green tomatoes.
I remember hearing about mock apple pie, but I think that had like Ritz crackers or something. But
that could be.
But I don't know. I've never heard about this with green tomatoes. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was not good.
Okay. Well, then there's probably a reason we haven't heard about it that much.
Exactly. It sounds kind of like, it tasted kind of like it sounds out of green tomatoes.
Probably no amount of sugar is going to help
sugar
that.
and cinnamon in, but yeah, it's not one of the things we added to our own recipe collection.
I suppose you would get the kind of the mass and some of the moisture. Probably too much moisture.
Sure,
actually,
it would kind of look like sliced green tomato would maybe look like a sliced apple, maybe. But anyway, yeah, well. I prefer my tomatoes nice and ripe and red. And it's been a good season for tomatoes.
Yeah. And
all in all, I'm happy. I'm comfortable with the way that the season was.
How many things do you still have? We still have, I think, 1 or 2 delicata squash on the vine that we'll probably pull off here this week. But just wanted to
just did ours.
Yep.
Just took in the squash. The vines were pretty much done.
Yep.
So we took in the squash.
Your carrots are still in the ground, though.
The carrots are in the ground.
Oh.
Dug the potatoes. Got those dug. Carrots, I'm letting those get some cool temperatures yet.
Yep.
And so I'm probably going to leave those until the bitter end.
Okay.
And then dig those, of course, before the soil starts freezing down. That reminds me, some years if I've delayed a little bit and then all of a sudden the cold weather starts turning and, it doesn't take too many cold nights and you can't get a shovel in the ground. So I have found myself putting straw over the carrot row, maybe a blanket or two over part of it so that it wouldn't freeze, because I had to get those dug. But anyway, I've made my resolve this year to make sure I get those carrots dug before I can't do so.
All right. Well, like you said, we're going to talk about some things to do to kind of put the garden to bed as we speak. But first of all, you've got a letter from a listener.
I do. All right. This letter is from Jesse. And Jesse wrote a nice long letter. I'm going to summarize some of it because he points out lots of good things in his letter. So Jesse begins. Hi, Don. Greetings from out west. I have a few comments for you, so hope this email doesn't get too long. Well, no, I appreciate hearing from you, Jesse. So Jesse says, I connected with the garden column you wrote about wave petunias. I've been starting them for about 8 years now and get seed from Harris Seed. It's always nice to hear from people where they have good success. I love the Opera Supreme series, particularly Raspberry Ice. And let's see, Jesse goes on. I used both of the Burpee's direct seed products in the garden. Remember we talked about those, the direct seeded tomato and pepper? Let's hear how Jesse did with them. Okay, Jesse continues. The Groundswell hybrid tomato and the Groundfather hybrid sweet pepper were planted. I didn't get them planted until June 7th. And look how well they did. He sent a photo, which looks awesome. They were planted right next to sweet corn. They didn't even have full sun, but I am impressed. Well, that's a good testimonial for that. Okay, then Jesse continues. Here's a fascinating part. Okay, Jesse continues. Last week was harvest time for the pineapple. This one produced about 2 cups of super sweet and juicy chunks that we enjoyed. I've got 3 on deck for next year's fruiting, 2 the next year, and then I'm done. I'm not starting any new ones this year.
Pineapple in North Dakota.
Yes, pineapple in North Dakota. And he sent a photo to show and prove. Now, Jesse's written before to me about his pineapple and his pineapple growing. And look at that, John. I've got a beautiful photo of a pineapple. And it is, it's bearing a big, beautiful fruit. And of course, he's doing this indoors.
Okay.
Of course, pineapple outdoors in North Dakota would not make it. So, wow, congratulations, Jesse. And Jesse goes on to say, thanks for taking the time to let me share. I listen to your podcasts when I'm out working in my greenhouse.
So just out of curiosity, so does Jesse have I can't tell from that photo, does Jesse have is that a pineapple tree then?
Pineapples grow on you wouldn't really call it a bush, and pineapples aren't on they aren't on a big palm tree like coconuts, that fall out of a tree. So pineapples are more of a kind of a low growing plant.
Oh.
And they bear the fruit kind of on the inside.
Well, so and then you've heard about and you see that
they're coming out kind of from the inside.
That people will chop off the top of a pineapple and put that in a pot or put that in some dirt and give it some moisture, give it some light, and it will grow. Do you know if that's how he's doing this?
Well, I tell you what, I am going to write back to Jesse.
Yeah,
and we're going to see if he'll share his secret for growing pineapples.
I think that would be great. And that would be a great kind of, a midwinter treat for us,
exactly.
People who are doing these kind of tropical, wonderful things all through the year. That'd be great.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll follow up. And thank you, Jesse, very much. You share some interesting, fascinating things. And I'm going to follow up with you to see if you'll share a few secrets on how to grow pineapple. Looks delicious.
Well, and so if people have questions for you, if they want to share their victories or things that they've learned, what's the best way to reach you?
Email is the best, Donald.Kinzler, Kinzler, at ndsu.edu. Donald.Kinzler at ndsu.edu. And it's great to hear from you guys.
All right, well, let's jump into the show now and let's talk a little bit about what we should be doing to kind of, like we've been talking about, the flowers are fading, the vegetables are being harvested. So what do we do next? Now it's kind of time to put the garden to bed, isn't it?
Because at some point the end is here, isn't it? At some point, start getting freezing every night. The soil's going to freeze down. We know snow will be coming. The weather kind of turns such that it's not so fun to be outside doing yard work. And so all of a sudden, the curtain just closes on the year. But as I always enjoy saying, we start looking for next year. It's not a cycle. It's an onward and upward spiral. Each year can be a little better. So, but kind of for putting things to bed out there, I always have a checklist that I kind of go through to make sure I'm doing everything that I should. And first on the list is rabbit protection. Because they can damage so many things. Topping the list of some of their preferred salad bar things during the wintertime, arborvitae. Can you imagine the flat, lush foliage of an arborvitae evergreen in the middle of winter when everything is all snow-covered and wow, a rabbit sees a fresh arborvitae and they can permanently destroy that. So our arborvitae, we have both globe and pyramidal shaped. Each fall, I circle them with chicken wire because I don't want to risk having them ruined.
Right.
Because they can totally gnaw off the foliage, and if they gnaw far enough in, that's not going to recover, so it'll be permanently marred for the rest of its life. So a little bit of work in the fall of the year, I'm willing to put in to save my arborvitaes. Also, fruit trees. Fruit trees have a very flavorful bark. I guess that makes sense.
Yep.
And so rabbits can get in and they can just gnaw off the outer bark. And also, if the snow gets high enough, they can go up on the snowbanks and chew. So I like to circle our apple trees with chicken wire. I guess at a minimum, I would probably wrap the trunks, which we should do anyway to prevent winter sun scald. So wrapping the trunks themselves can help. So do that. But also, if you really want to protect from rabbits, put then a circle of chicken wire around the tree itself. Now, as snow gets too high, if your chicken wire is 3 to 4 feet high, snowdrifts can get higher than that. But sometimes if that is happening, I will take the snow blower or just my shovel, and I'll shovel around the perimeter outside of that fencing so that the rabbits can't get up and access the fruit trees. Some years when we've had a lot of snow, there's been a lot of damage on apple trees from the rabbits being able to get up into the canopy of the tree and just totally ruining the tree. And the fruit buds, the fruit and flower buds on an apple tree are already set. They're set this summer. That's how they can pop open right away in the spring. So now if a rabbit can get up and access those little preformed buds out on the twigs, that's good eating for them. And which means if they nibbled all those off, you're not going to get any flowers and fruit next year. So rabbit protection, so important.
And, like you said, to do that first off, and that's right, because rabbits will now start turning towards, they don't have to wait until winter. We had our burning bush. They got to our burning bush in late October one year when things got cold, and they did a number on it. It's bounced back, but now I have to go out and circle them, and I'll be doing that this weekend.
Well, sure. Why eat brown dormant grass when they can have your burning bush?
Yeah, burning bush, hydrangea. Yep, they've gone after both of those.
Raspberries. They love going after raspberries. Rose bushes. They'll gnaw those down. They don't even spit out the thorns. Thorns and all on those. Spirea, they love those. And fencing is the best deterrent. You could try repellents such as liquid fence or plant skid. Both of those have some good science behind them, but you do need to repeat the application. But if you are in a spot where you can't do fencing, then repellents are certainly worth a try. Now, I've not had good success with some of the homemade repellents, such as hanging Irish Spring soap or dryer sheets, mothballs, some of the things like that. Now, they might work for some people in some locations, and, I don't doubt them, but they don't have a wide enough track record for all of us to say, well, your answer against rabbits is to hang a bunch of Irish Spring soap out there. And so anyway, now the other thing to keep in mind too is when I circle like the rose bushes with chicken wire, in order to give support to that chicken wire, I drive in some wood posts. At the lumber yard, I just get some kind of lath type wood,
some little stakes.
Yeah, some stakes. They sell stakes, a dozen, and they aren't too expensive. And so I need to drive those into the ground. Now, at some point in early November, the soil is going to freeze such that it would be hard to pound those in to support your chicken wire. So sometime in the last half of October here, I make sure that I get those pounded in, those wood stakes pounded in, so then I can put the chicken wire around the outer perimeter of those. So I've got to make sure that I get that done before the soil freezes solid. And in our area, the soil tends to freeze solid sometime the first half of November, such that you can't get a shovel in the ground any longer. And as long as we're talking about apple trees and some of the other trees, it's a good idea to get a layer of mulch put around. We talk about the 5-5-5, a 5-foot diameter, about 5 inches thick, and kept 5 inches away from the trunk. Now, especially on younger trees, because we can do this in the fall, good time, especially with the younger trees, that does prevent the cold from going quite as deeply in also. So on a young tree, if we have an open, exposed winter with little insulating snow, that mulch can really help. Or also strawberries or tender perennials, things that maybe you planted this fall. If we had a crystal ball and could tell what the winter snow was going to do. Okay, if we could look ahead and say, well, we're going to get 12 to 24 inches of good, consistent snow, well, then our perennials and strawberries and things really wouldn't need extra mulching. Yeah. But we don't know that. Last winter, we had an open winter, not much snow, And a lot of people lost perennials, strawberries, and even things that had been in place for many years just froze out without that insulated snow. Did you lose much, John?
We lost a couple of plants,
Yeah. Yeah, luckily, we only lost a couple of rose bushes, but they had been in place for a while.
Okay.
But the mulch really helps. And I did protect some of the things with mulch. So anyway, since we don't have that crystal ball, it's a good idea with some of the perennials, especially those that maybe aren't quite as well established, to add a good layer of mulch around. Mulch being shredded bark. So we have our perennial beds mulched with shredded bark. So sometimes I'll just pull a little extra of that mulch up around some of the perennials, and then in next spring kind of rake it back in place. Or leaves or straw work well. Now it's important though to not put that on too soon. If the soil is too warm and wet, and you put mulch over some of these perennials, they can rot. Warm, moist. Bring on the rot. So we do want some cold to get into the soil. So I like to wait until there is a little bit of frost in the soil, maybe such that you can't put your shovel down in. And the idea with mulch is to keep perennials or strawberries can easily be winter killed. The idea is to keep them comfortably frozen during the winter time. So we let a little bit of frost get down into the soil and then mulch so that they stay consistently comfortably frozen, so we don't get the freezing and thawing and heaving. I also get a kick out of that. In an open winter, your perennials can heave. Yeah, I just get kind of a kick out of that. They can literally be heaved up out of the soil with the freezing and thawing. So a good layer of mulch prevents that and just keeps them comfortable under that blanket, and it prevents the cold temperatures from penetrating so deeply down around those. And boy, as long as we're talking about cold coming eventually, it's important to loosen the hoses or any sprinklers that a person has, drain the water out of those. I've had water freeze inside a sprinkler, that I didn't drain. And then in the spring, the metal part was kind of cracked.
Yeah.
And so important to take the hoses off. And So after a little break, let's talk about some other types of things that we should do to close things up for the winter.
That sounds good.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about putting the garden to bed now that we're in mid to late October now. It's time to start looking at the yard and being fine with the season that was, but it's time to get ready for winter. And so we're talking about some of those preparations now. So let's talk a little bit about what we should do with some of the things that we've bought throughout the year, like herbicides and insecticides. Do we want to keep those in the garage? How should we treat these?
Yeah, now my favorite products are liquids, like, of course, herbicides are, typically liquid, and the insecticides and fungicides. I like the liquid concentrate that I can mix up in my little 2-gallon sprayer and then apply. And so now those liquids, of course, if they freeze over winter, they're going to be ruined. And my garage is detached, so it freezes easily. How about yours, John?
Detached, same situation.
Yeah, and so now I keep those materials out in the garage, where they're handy to apply. And so each fall, I need to remember to take those down into our basement. So I suppose if a garage is kept above freezing, you might be safe. Check the label, though. Sometimes there's a lower temperature at which they're not to be stored. Maybe it's not even freezing, but maybe there's a lower temperature threshold. So the products will generally say what temperatures to store them at, but for sure, don't allow them to freeze. And of course, I've learned that the hard way.
Right.
The following spring, I've gone, oh my gosh, and they're they won't they're just kind of like gel or something.
Yeah.
They freeze and get
They
all
don't apply
clumpy.
well.
And now dusts, check again the storage on those. It probably does not do dust any good to freeze, like if it's an insecticidal dust. But check the storage on that and go from there. And let's see, the other thing too, that if you do allow those materials to freeze, like even herbicides, some of the herbicides may, if they're kind of an oil base, they might not physically freeze, but it could affect their effectiveness.
Their potency, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So make sure we move those in. Also, maybe I should mention that too on garden seeds. Sometimes if we plant things and have a few extra garden seeds, well, the garage wasn't the best place to store them over winter too, where it probably gets hot. And then, so I would definitely tuck those in the refrigerator. Freezing does not hurt most seeds, but the preferred is refrigeration in a closed container.
What about grass seed? Because grass seed, you'd think like, well, maybe that could be outside because it's grass. But
yeah, the freezing is not going to kill the grass seed.
Okay.
But again, there's probably more damage, and I've been as guilty as anyone. I've seeded grass seed and then had more than I needed, so I put it in the garage. And of course, our garage on 90-degree days is probably 90 or higher, and that's not the preferred temperature and humidity level.
Yeah.
So it would have been much better indoors in a refrigerated container if you've got some left. But freezing is not going to hurt it. But again, generally refrigerated storage is probably the best rather than letting it freeze. So let's see now, other things too, if we take a look at outdoor containers, right before everything kind of shuts down, it's best if we can remove the plants from the outdoor containers and, to get all the old, actually in Fargo here, we haven't had killing frost yet.
Nope.
We've still got some plants in containers that are looking pretty decent.
Yeah.
And but before everything shuts down, it's best to pull those plants out, shake the soil off. We can reuse the soil, and but get the old plants and the trash and any leaves, get those off so that it's a good sanitary soil without a lot of leaf litter and stuff that could carry disease. And so make sure you get those pulled out. I've let them freeze, and then it's hard to get that plant out, and much better to get it out this fall. I should mention too that if you have any ceramic planters that could crack, if the soil is wet or gets wet from late fall rains and that soil kind of expands or contracts, freezing can crack some planters. So make sure in that case to maybe take the soil out, the potting mix out of those. With our plastic containers and other containers that are not really breakable, I leave the soil in those. And that seems to work quite well.
Talking about a little bit about that soil, we've talked before about reusing some kind of potting soil that you have in a pot that I've got a couple of big, tall, like yard waste containers that I just throw my old potting soil in, and we'll use that maybe on the bottom as a filler in next year's. Could you ever throw some of that stuff in the garden and on top of? And is that a good idea, or is that maybe not?
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Because I hate to waste a good potting mix.
Yeah.
Even the mixes that I do seeding in, and if there's a little bit left, from after you transplant, I rarely dispose of any potting mix or seeding mix or anything. Anything that I don't need, I'll put in the bottom of another, you can never have too many containers.
Yep.
And so I'll put them in the bottom and start another container, or add out into the vegetable garden or the flower bed and work that in a little bit. Because a lot of those mixes have good peat moss and perlite, vermiculite, coconut coir, good products that I hate to see go to waste. So I'll always recycle into an area like that.
Okay.
Well, and next, no fall would be completed if we didn't talk about voles.
Yeah.
Have you had vole damage in the past?
I don't
years?
think we have voles yet.
Yeah, areas around our metros and farms vary as to whether you've had vole activity. And once I did a little research on voles. Now, voles are a field mouse. They don't have the long tail that a house mouse does. They're kind of dark brownish very dark brown, have a very little tail, short tail. They don't run nearly as fast as a house mouse. I can even outrun a vole,
Okay.
or at least on a good day. And voles are that sneaky little rodent that most of the time we see them after the snow melts. And you see on your lawn all these channels where they've worked on the surface under the protection of snow. They worked on the lawn surface and made a mess out of them. All these little meandering channels where they've feasted on your grass. The grass oftentimes comes back, but it makes a mess of it. But they can also hunker down at the base of fruit trees or other trees and gnaw the bark around right at the base, killing those. So voles can be a real nuisance. And now in the fall of the year, before they can hide under the snow, they're oftentimes at the perimeter of our yards, maybe under decks, kind of around foundations of places, kind of hiding out, waiting for that snow, and then they'll go under the cover of that. So what I like to do, there's a couple of options. I have not had good success with vole repellents. But again, they're worth a try. They maybe just didn't work for me, but they may work for others. We can use traps, rodent-type traps, put inside a jar or a PVC tube so that pets or kids can't access them. Baited with peanut butter. Voles seem to like that. So rodent traps. Rodent baits, poisonous baits, again, tucked inside a jar or a jar set on its side or a PVC tube. Voles tend to like to go through little tunnels, so they'll go into a PVC tube quite well and get the rodent. And then that also keeps the poison bait from getting wet. But again, you need to use great caution with that so that kids and pets, cannot access that. There is kind of a neat, there's a neat little gadget that we've had Eric Baker on our podcast in the past, and I got this at his garden center, Baker Garden and Gift. You create this vole trap out of a 5-gallon bucket. Okay, you fill it with antifreeze so that this time of year it's not going to freeze. And it has a little ramp that goes up onto the top of the 5-gallon bucket. And then there's a little platform there that you bait with peanut butter or other bait. And when the vole goes up there and does that, it flips it down in and it gets trapped down below. And so it's kind of a handy little trap for voles. There was a couple out in West Fargo that used that, and they caught up to 30 voles in that.
Yeah.
I did a little research a few years ago. I was going to mention that. One vole can have, I think it's something like, it's hundreds of kids, little voles. They can have hundreds of kids in one season, and it only takes, a vole can start reproducing when they're only about a month old. And so they can build up populations. They do go in cycles. And so if you're in an area, either rural or urban, where you have voles, our house on the south side of Fargo, we're oftentimes bothered by voles. So anyway, kind of a long thing, but voles can do a lot of damage, especially on trees. So as long as you're mentioning about trees, it's not too late to put on the tree trunk protectors, especially apple trees and fruit trees. They can get winter sun damage so devastatingly on their trunks. So tree wraps, the white plastic tree guards work. I like the tree wrap on a roll because I can spiral it on up, maybe snake it between some of the lower branches, gives you a little more leeway than the plastic tubes. But garden centers sell both. So we should make sure that we get those tree wraps on, both for rodent protection, rabbit protection also, and to protect against the winter sun scald on those. So we need to, that's always on my checklist to make sure I get that done. And of course, that can even be done after the soil starts freezing. Sometimes I'll go out on a nice early November day and get that done as well. And the garden tools. Sometimes we're so busy during the gardening season, hoeing and pruning and doing all these things, that it's easy maybe to neglect the garden tools a little. But right now, before we put them away for the season, it's a good time to make sure that we scrape off any soil that's on there, because that can easily lead to some rust. And also, if there is any rust that has started, a little sandpaper or emery cloth rubbing over to get that rust off of there. And then oil is great. I like linseed oil. Linseed oil can also be rubbed onto the handles, the wooden handles, and that gives really good protection. So adding a little light coating of oil, both the wood handles and on the metal portions, will keep them in good shape. And of course, if a person really wanted to do well, is to sharpen the hose and anything else, give those a little nice sharpen with a file, and we'll be all ready to go next spring.
Well, one of the other things too is your lawnmower. Do you think you've had your last lawn mow yet? Yeah.
No,
So
I'm going to give it. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, John, because lawns, the final mowing should be taken down to about 2 inches.
Okay.
3 inches is the recommended all during the season. Lawns are still a little green, which means they're photosynthesizing, building up energy. So we should wait until they become kind of dormant and brown to do that last mowing, and take it down to about 2 inches is the recommended going into fall. So now I have not given it that lower mowing yet, because the green grass is still doing its photosynthesis thing. So when should you do that? Well, definitely before snow, give it its final cut down. Sometimes if I've gone down from 3 inches to 2 inches, it lays like a hayfield. And so sometimes I need to go gradually down, maybe make a couple of mowings, or I'll bag that last cutting. And so usually I kind of maybe more towards the first half of November, if we don't get an early snow that stays.
Yep.
It has caught me in the past. We've gotten snow that stays and shoot. The reason for reducing the height is so it's not so floppy under the snow cover, because if it gets too kind of mushed and matted down, that can bring snow mold. And also the voles have more habitat to work if they have a longer grass. So it is a wise idea to reduce that mowing height. And so I try to time it maybe, a nice day, first part of November is nice. I have mowed on Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
Just to say I could. And the last couple of years, we didn't have much snow these last couple of winters, really, or at least not last winter. And I mowed Wednesday, December, was it December 1st or 3rd? Well, the first part of December.
Wow.
I mowed the last mowing, mostly to say I did and could. Wow. Mowing lawn in North Dakota in December. And so, yeah, but typically I try to give the last mowing about the first part of November.
And after you mow, when you're ready to kind of put your lawnmower away, make sure you either drain your gas or add an additive in there to make sure that it preserves or it stabilizes over the winter, because gas isn't meant to last in a can that long.
Exactly.
So,
and one other thing on the lawnmower that would really be nice to go, because when spring comes, it seems we're so busy. It would be a nice idea too. And I'll remind myself of this, to sharpen the lawnmower blade now. If we've got a little more free time, maybe in the fall, it'd be nice to start out next spring with the blade already sharpened. Because when spring hits, sometimes all of a sudden you're anxious to get out there with the lawnmower, and it would be nice to have that blade sharpened already this fall. Well, John, after we take a little break, how about we wrap it up with a couple of other late fall reminders before things close down?
Sounds like a good plan.
Thank you.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and we're talking about getting ready for winter, kind of putting the garden and the yard to bed. Don, where are we at now? What other things should we be looking at?
Well, one thing, for anything new that we planted this year, it's important to preserve the identity of that. For example, I planted a couple of new lilies, and the lilies came with a little plastic tag, and so I dutifully stuck that little tag down right by the lily. But, those plastic tags aren't very, they can weather and they can break or be lost. And then I've lost that identity for that. So what I do like to do is I like to get a more permanent label. Maybe it's the metal plant stakes, something you can write on that will preserve the identity of that better than that little plastic wimpy little tag that I stuck down in right next to that lily or other things. And even any shrubs, oftentimes they'll have a tag kind of attached or wired on. Mm-hmm. Well, I've had those kind of come loose over winter and blow off in the wind, and there went the identity of that plant. So I try to more permanently label things here going into winter. And that's important because, for example, on the lilies that I planted, I need to know, was that the winter hardy Asiatic lily or did I plant one of the tender ones? And so I need to know the identity of those. And gosh, on fruit trees too. Yep. If you're depending on the label that was kind of attached on, boy, if that blows off in the wintertime, then you don't know what apple variety. Yeah. Hopefully we've written them down too, right. But I don't always get that done. The other thing that's so important is if you plant new perennials, and of course the tops kind of tend to disappear over winter time, and so a new perennial, I like to mark that location so next spring I know where that's going to emerge. Maybe use a little wooden stake or something, or maybe that more permanent marker that I've put the identity of that on, maybe that denotes that location good enough. But I like to mark where my new perennials are so that I know exactly where that's going to emerge in the spring.
Well, especially for planting, if you've got things that maybe will continue to grow and grow bigger as the season goes along, when things come up, I know I'm guilty of this. I look and I think, oh, I've got a lot of bare spots. Oh, I've got a lot of places I got to put in some plants. Well, if you've got something that emerges later and comes in later, it comes in big, you don't have as many spots as you thought you did. So
definitely. And in fact, the winter hardy hibiscus, I just planted. Is a great one, yeah. I just planted that I think it was the summerific series, one of those. The winter hardy hibiscus with a great big huge blooms. Now they are traditionally late coming up.
They're very late, yes.
And so I want to make sure I don't mistake that for a weed when I'm hoeing.
Yep.
And so marking it well lets me know when that is supposed to emerge. The other thing, I always think I'm going to remember things. For example, on the annual flowers, the ones that did well in the containers, I always think I'm going to remember. And then next late winter, when it's time to order seeds, I'm usually asking Mary, now what was that petunia that did so well that I was going to remember what it was? And so just kind of taking a little bit of a stock of what did well, writing it down. Maybe you still have your seed order from last year, but keeping that kind of handy, making a little note what did perform well, what didn't, so that next spring we kind of have a little bit of record what we want to plant again.
Well, speaking of planting, I got a question for you. As somebody who often in many aspects of my life, my eyes have a bigger appetite than maybe my body can handle. And that's true also in gardening. I still have some plants that I never got around to planting.
Well, I thought I'm a bad gardener. I thought I was the only one.
So I've got a couple of hostas and a daisy that I didn't get around to planting, and it's too late now. How can I overwinter them outside?
Well, I'll meet that with one daylily and two phlox.
Okay, glad to know I'm not alone.
Yes, I've still got a couple things I just didn't get planted. Okay, so a common question is, should we go ahead and plant those, or is there another way we should overwinter them? And almost always, yes, go ahead and plant them.
Still now.
If you've got some things. It's probably not the preferred.
Okay.
It would have been preferred to have planted these a month ago, but we didn't. And so they will definitely winter better if they are planted down in the ground rather than trying to winter them, in their pots in a garage or something.
Okay.
So definitely plant them and water them well. Right after planting, even if your soil's a little moist, water them to get good soil to root contact. And then what you can really do to kind of buy yourself some time, a little bit of thawed soil time yet, warm soil time, is put a layer of mulch around the plant.
Okay.
So for example, your hosta, maybe don't cover the leaves and everything with mulch, but mulch around the soil around it.
Okay.
That'll help keep that soil a little warmer.
Okay.
So with the daylily that I've got, I'm going to plant it this weekend, and then I'll surround the planting soil, and I suppose we're talking at least a couple of feet around so that you'll keep that soil warmer longer, and that'll just kind of help it establish a little bit. And then when the cold actually does settle in, then maybe add over the top of that perennial, leaves, straw, wood mulch, something over the top, and that'll just kind of soften the blow of winter for that young newly planted plant. But they'll almost always winter better planted than if you try to winter them some other way. But now what happens if the soil freezes such that you can't get a shovel in the ground? Then one way that works quite well is to set those pots of plants, your trees, shrubs, perennials, along your house foundation. Not the south side because it warms, thaws, freezes, gets too warm, but along the east or north side.
Okay.
And put them right alongside the house foundation, maybe even lay the pot down a little and then cover it with leaves, maybe even bags of leaves. Okay. And that will winter things quite well too. Similar to the garden centers, the material they have left, they winter them outdoors, lay the pots down. Oftentimes they'll tip the pots down and then cover them with big insulated blankets. But, bags stuffed with leaves can make a pretty good insulated blanket too. But as long as you can get a shovel in the ground, they're almost always better planted.
All right. Well, good to know, and it gives me hope. And hey, here we are in late October, mid-October. I can still do some planting.
Yes, well, now I feel better that I'm not the only one that still had some pots sitting outside the garage yet to be installed.
All right. Well, if people have any questions for you about late planting or overwintering things or taking care of things in the yard, or if they want to look back on all their successes that they had this summer, what's the best way to reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, Kinzler, @ndsu.edu. And I want to thank Jesse again for sending, I just read part of his, but he also sent some wonderful photos of some petunias and things that did so well. So it's fun to share successes as well as questions that we have.
That's great. And it's great to hear, and especially somebody who's growing pineapple in North Dakota. What a wonderful thing to hear about.
That is awesome. Well, thank you, John, and thanks everyone for listening.